And again, like I said, it's not shocking or disturbing or anything that the politicians say this and they're going to do a complete 180 because, I mean, we know that the politicians are all in on this. What scares me, what says more than anything to me, is that like a quarter of the country is going along with all of it. And it is, the Middle East stuff is just one part of it. It's also Russia. It's a lot of things where the Democratic Party just almost has complete control over their constituency. And they jump and the people say how high, in spite of the contradictions, in spite of what they believed 10 minutes ago. 10 minutes ago they were against the wars. Well, now they say that we're in favor of the wars. The Democrats say, okay. And I'm talking about people. I'm talking about voters. And I think that just kind of goes to show that in this system in particular, I think Darren Beattie was tweeting about this, and I've talked about this a lot before on my show. It's a very important point. In a democratic system, this is very important. In a democratic system, it is necessary for the people to be thoroughly deceived, thoroughly under an illusion. In other countries where you have an elite, and other countries where you have somebody running the country, it's very explicit and overt who's in charge. In Russia, it's Putin. In China, it's Xi Jinping and the Communist Party. In North Korea, it's Kim Jong-un, right? And they know who calls the shots and what their system is, and they just have to deal with that. Because if they're not okay with that, they'll get arrested, They'll kick down their door. If they try to meaningfully agitate against the system, they color outside the lines, they know the consequences. But in a so-called free society, it's not like we're without an elite. It's not like we're without people in charge. Of course there are people in charge. You think the voters are in charge? You think you and me are in charge? You think it's even the political parties? Of course not. This country, like any other country, has a group of who knows how many. Maybe it's a dozen, maybe it's 100. I'd maybe cap it at 100 people that are really calling the shots, really making the big decisions, and they use a cadre of managerial class types, bureaucrats, managers, whatever, regulators, to carry out their decrees. We understand that our country is no different than Russia, China, North Korea. The difference is that in a free society, we are the conduit through which this power is expressed because it's a democracy, because it is a liberal capitalist society. That means it is required that we are willfully believing in these illusions. We are taking part in participating in this great lie that we're really the ones in control. Do you understand why that's far more disturbing? Do you understand why that's in a way more totalitarian, more repressive than Russia or China or these other systems? At least in these other systems, I guess in theory you have this freedom of conscience in the sense that you know who's the boss, you know what the rules are, and as long as you don't really act up, you're basically going to be okay. But in this country, it is required that through advertisements, through other means of mass communication and political control, we have to buy into this. We have to believe the lies that we're told to keep the system legitimate so that the people that are controlling the system retain their legitimacy. That means that this country, more than any other country, is mind controlled. It's not just that they keep their legitimacy and their power by the force of guns, as in other countries, but in this country, it is totally contingent on you believing the lie. And to me, that's why the stuff about the Democrats is so disturbing. It's basically a confirmation that this is how it is. This is how we live. There are people, and this is where the NPC meme, I think, came from. That's why it was so popular, that are like automatons. This stuff about, well, if you're a racist, they disassociate from you, It's because they're so controlled by the system, and that's a necessary component of it for the elites to retain political control. And that's Tulsi, and that's the Twitter battle between Tulsi Gabbard and Hillary Clinton. And then that's why Tulsi Gabbard is totally based and Hillary Clinton is totally cringe when they're fighting on Twitter. But it's true. But that's my takeaway. Because this rift in the Democratic Party, it's absurd. It makes no sense. If you were to go back in time 10 years ago and show the Democrats that Hillary Clinton was going to put Tulsi Gabbard on blast and say, she's a puppet of the Russians, she's a puppet of the Soviet Union because she doesn't want eternal war in the Middle East. Could they explain that? I mean, would that make any sense to them? It would make no sense to them. You know, if Tulsi Gabbard went back in time and ran for the nomination in 2004, 2008, she'd give Kerry and Obama a run for their money if she was a little bit more charismatic. But the nominee from 2016 is now out there saying a renewed Russian empire is controlling Tulsi Gabbard. That's why she wants us to pull out of Syria. If you went back 10 years ago and told people about this, they'd say, wait a second, we're in Syria? That's what they'd say, number one. But then number two, as Democrats, they'd say, what are we doing in Syria? Let's get out of there. And then they'd say, wait a second, you think Russia is like this revanchist force? What they probably say like Barack Obama, the 1980s want their foreign policy back, right? But it just took 10 years for all of that to be a 180, and nobody questions it. And nobody's talking about that. Nobody notices that. Doesn't that bother anybody? Doesn't that tell you what we're kind of dealing with here? Things are not as they seem. But that's Tulsi Gabbard and Hillary Clinton. Some interesting stuff there. You know, a lot of people are going to take this story. You know, I know the your usual suspects, Crowder, Shapiro, all these guys are going to say, you know, their analysis of this would be like, well, Tulsi Gabbard's right and Hillary Clinton is wrong and Hillary Clinton is corrupt. Slay, Tulsi Gabbard. Wow, you're great. But, you know, I'm really digging deep here, really peeling back the layers. It really says a lot about our society. But we're going to move on. We're going to talk